Hello and welcome to Varn Vlog. Or perhaps, as Lukács would have called this, Reflections on Grand Hotel Abyss. An essay by Lukács that, frankly, needs to be translated into English. Today I'm talking about my favorite phrase that I pull from Adorno. Now, my early enamorment with Adorno, who I started reading when I was about 19 years old, I went through this phase when I was going to the public library a lot, and I first picked up Nietzsche, The Genealogy of Good and Evil, and worked through the portable Nietzsche, and then as much Nietzsche as I could get. Um, then I started reading Adorno as kind of a response to that. And I started with one of the most enigmatic texts, Minimal Minimum Moralia. It's one of the most enigmatic and one of the most quoted because it is aphoristic. It is mimicking Nietzsche. Minima Moralia is a reference to Aristotle's Magna Moralia, the greater morality or greater ethics. Um, and what we have here is the minimum ethics, and it's subtitled Reflections on a Damaged Life. And of course, also, um, it comes from Adorno's negative dialectical sociology, or his critique of sociology almost, his critical theory, his melancholy science, which again is to contrast with Nietzsche's gay science. It's an inversion. Now, I'm going to use two translations today. I'm going to use the Jebcott translation, which is available from Verso, and I'm going to read it first because it's the most famous, and it's the phrasing I use. And I'm going to use the Rebman translation, which is available for free. You can find it on Marxist.org, which translates things a little differently, and you can hear the difference. And then I'm going to talk about some other things that I use this for that Adorno probably had no conception or reference to. He definitely wasn't talking about systems theory in this way. His form of critical theory, whether you think it's Marxist or post-Marxist, and that's always up for debate, really does pull from this. And the number of ironies and references are kind of astronomical. And Adorno does not, footnote himself. He doesn't tell you what he's referencing. He expects you to figure it out. All right. So to really get into this, let's get into aphorism 18, refuge for the homeless, in the Jebcott translation. And I believe it's aphorism 18, asylum for the homeless, in the Redman. I will put a link in the Redman in the show notes, and I'll put the citation for the Jebcott, but it's the famous one. It's the one that Verso's replanted like 3 times with 3 or 4 different covers since the early 70s. But anyway, refuge for the homeless. The predicament of private life today is shown by its arena. Now, this is interesting. Already we see the paradox is here. Private life, arena. It's like a dialectical paradox almost. The predicament of private life is shown by its arena. Well, what makes an arena interesting? An arena is meant to be watched, and a private life is not to be. So the private life being shown by its arena is an inversion of what private life is supposed to be. Oh, wait. Dwelling in the proper sense is now impossible. The traditional residents we grew up in have grown intolerable. Each trait of comfort in them is paid for with a betrayal of knowledge, each vestige of shelter with the musty pact of family interest. The functional modern habitations designed from a tabula rasa, a clean slate, are living cases manufactured by experts for Philistines, are factory sites that have strayed into the consumption sphere, devoid of all relation to the occupant. I mean, this is before mobile homes and McMansions and shit. In them, even the nostalgia for independent existence, defunct in any case, is sent packing. Modern man wishes to sleep close to the ground like an animal. A German magazine decreed with pathetic masochism before Hitler, abolishing with the bed the threshold between waking and dreaming. The sleepless are on call at any hour. Again, a paradox. Unresistingly ready for anything, alert and unconscious at once. Anyone seeking refuge in the genuine but purchased period-style house embalms himself alive. The attempt to evade responsibility for one's residence by moving into a hotel or furnished rooms makes the enforced condition of immigration a widely chosen norm. Which we have to remember, this was written while Adorno was in exile, in quotation marks, in California, which he hated. The hardest hit, as everywhere, are those who have no choice. They live, if not in slums and bungalows, that by tomorrow may be leaf huts, trailers, cars, are the open air. The house is past. The bombing of European cities, as well as the labor and concentration camps, merely proceed as executors. With what was imminently developed of technology, has long decided to be the fate of houses. There are now good only to be thrown away like old food cans. The possibility of residences is annihilated by that of a socialist society, which, once missed, saps the foundation of bourgeois life. No individual can resist this process. He need only to take an interest in the furniture design or interior decoration to find himself developing an arty, crafty sensibility of the bibliophile. However firmly he may oppose the arts and crafts in the narrower sense. From the distance, the difference between the Vienna workshops and the Bauhaus is no longer so considerable. Purely functional curves, having broken free of their purpose, are now becoming just ornamental as the basic structures of cubism. The best mode of conduct in the face of all this still seems an uncommitted, suspended one. To lead a private life, as far as the social order and one's own need will tolerate nothing else, but not to attach weight to it as something still socially substantial and individually appropriate. Quote, "It is part of my good fortune not to be a house owner," Nietzsche already wrote in The Gay Science. Today, we should have to add, it is part of morality not to be at home in one's home. This gives some indication of the difficult relationship in which the individual now stands to his property, as long as he still possesses anything at all. The trick is to keep in view and to express the fact that private property no longer belongs to one, in the sense that consumer goods have become potentially so abundant that no individual has the right to cling to the principle of their limitation, but that one must nevertheless have possessions if one is not to sink into that dependence and need which serves the blind perpetuation of property relations. But the thesis of this paradox leads to destruction. A loveless disregard for things which necessarily turns against people too, and its antithesis, no sooner uttered, is an ideology for those wishing with a bad conscience to keep what they have. A wrong life cannot be lived rightly. And that's the Jebcott translation. And I love it. It's almost poetic. But let's read the Rebman. How are things going for private life today is made evident by its arena. Actually, one can no longer dwell any longer. The traditional dwellings in which we grew up have taken on the aspect of something unbearable. Every mark of comfort therein is paid for with the betrayal of cognition. Every trace of security with the stuffy community of interest of the family. The newly functionalized ones, constructed as a tabula rasa, are cases made by technical experts for Philistines, are factory sites which have strayed into the sphere of consumption without any relation to the dweller. They slap the longing for independent existence, which anyway no longer exists, in the face. With pathetic masochism, A German magazine decreed before Hitler that the modern human beings want to live close to the ground like animals, abolishing, along with the bed, the boundary between waking and dreaming. Those who stay overnight are available at all times and unresistingly ready for anything, simultaneously alert and unconscious. Whoever flees into degenerate but purchase historical housing embalms themselves alive. Those who try to evade the responsibility for dwelling by moving into a hotel or into a furnished apartment make a canny norm, as it were, out of the compulsory condition of immigration. Things are worse of all, as always, for those who have no choice at all. They live, if not exactly in slums, then in bungalows, which tomorrow may be thatched huts, trailers. And that's in English, actually, in the original German. Autos are camps, resting places under the open sky. The house is gone. The destruction of European cities, as much as the labor and concentration camps, are merely executors of what the imminent development of technics long ago decided for the houses. These are good only to be thrown away, like old tin cans. The possibility of dwelling is annihilated by that of the socialistic society, which, having been missed, sets bourgeois one in motion towards catastrophe. This is Adorno's hint that socialism was supposed to come and it didn't. And maybe it's all too late now. Hence the grand abyss that Lukács accused him of. But anyway, get back here. No individual can do anything against it. Even those who occupy themselves with furniture designs and interior decorations would already move into the circle of artsy subtlety in the manner of bibliophiles, however opposed one might be against the artsiness in the narrow sense. From the distance, the differences between the Viennese workshops and the Bauhaus are no longer considerable. In the meantime, the curves of pure purposive form have become independent of their function and pass over into ornaments, just like the basic shapes of cubism. The best conduct in regards to all this still appears to be non-binding, suspending one to lead a private life, as long as the social order of society and one's need will allow nothing else, but to put weight on such, as if it were still socially substantiable and individually appropriate. It is one of my joys not to be a homeowner, wrote Nietzsche in The Gay Science. To this should be added, ethics today means not being at home in one's house. This illustrates something of the difficult relationship between individual persons vis-a-vis their property, so long as they have anything at all. The trick consists of certifying and expressing the fact that private property no longer belongs to one person, in the sense that abundance of consumer goods has become potentially so great that no individual has the right to cling to the principle of their restriction. That nevertheless one must have property if one does not wish to land in the dependence and privation which perpetuates the blind continuation of property the blind continuation of the relations of ownership. But the thesis of this paradox leads to destruction, a loveless lack of attention for things, which necessarily turns against human beings too. And the antithesis is already, the moment one expresses it, an ideology for those who want to keep up with theirs with a bad conscience. There is no right life in the wrong one. In the original German, that phrase is again, es gibt kein richtiges Leben im Falschen. Minima Moralia, the damaged life where morals have bare meaning. The incentives are all wrong and paradoxical. To own more, you consume more and devalue the things you own. To be poor, to be pushed out of property, is to valorize the relation of property itself. And so on and so on. I quote this at people all the time because I want to emphasize that your context removes you from most moral functioning, which is not to say you should be immoral, but it's to say to be functional is to often live in the paradox of the fact that you can't totally be that. The poor person prioritizes relations, but in some ways, they're more instrumentalized, not less than the rich. But the rich have had instrumentalized masses of people and their labor and alienate them from them to become rich most of the time. How many massively rich petite bourgeois do you know? And if they didn't get it off of the exploitation of the later, they got it from the exploitation of the government collecting rent for them. How can you be moral in that? The incentives for the social justice advocate who works at the university as a professor is that they work at a site of immense inequality and immense social stratification. Not just in the fact that their job, whether they admit it or not, is to provide opportunity by sorting people and to teach people by limiting access to knowledge to the general public, but also, and that they are so often from either the most elite slice of a marginalized or oppressed demographic, and so much that those words have any meaning, are of a demographic and go about speaking for people of which they have no skin in their game as a way to, I don't know, justify their position in society. The cop enforces the law by violating it. Even if you assume the exemption, the state of exemption that the cop has is not a violation of the law, it is the authority for them to use violence that is not authorized for anyone else that makes them an officer of the state. It is the state's ability to grant the exemption to its privilege monopoly on violence to individuals acting in its name in uniform and a badge. These paradoxes cannot go unnoticed. They're not unique to capitalism. They're deeper than that in some way. But in capital, it comes up more and more. These dialectical paradoxes lead to an almost poetic despair in Adorno. But for me, I think about this in many ways. The person who confuses politics with morality misses the fundamental contradictions in both. Cannot see the systems for what they are. It's the same kind of thing as I complain when leverage is not equal to popularity or discipline is not equal to leverage. All of them are necessary in democratic societies, but they're not the same. And when I say they're necessary, they're not all necessary in the same person. The Heritage Foundation built an empire by not being popular and not being seen, but by influencing the popular by having a wedge in the law and finding the loopholes in the law and setting up the justices, which now stand in the way of the Heritage Foundation's own program. Same too with liberals. Liberals talked about embodying the democratic spirit, but they have always focused on the two least democratic forms of government to do that. The administrative state, which is part of the executive, just usually they prefer the not violent having parts of it are, well, they're still having violence, but the ones that seem more ideological than repressive, to use a kind of Althusserian framework that would make Adorno squirm. But nonetheless, what incentives do you set up for the society, and how do you do that? How do you build those incentives? Because if you expect people just to be good by ideology or by abstract morality, without a community and skin in the same game, what do you think will happen? Eventually, the only way to enforce that is violence, which exhausts society and the literal exhaustion of lives. So when I say a wrong life can't be lived rightly, or a false life can't be lived truly, which is also not really what the German says, but it's closer. One cannot rightly live a false life is probably the most literal translation of the German. But a false life implies a true one, just like the private arena implies both the private, which pulls away from the public, and the arena, which is necessarily public. How do you build a society that deals with these contradictions in systemic ways? Because it creates strange attractors. This is something that I think dialectics, and particularly Frankfurt School, don't always deal with. The accumulation of things, of these contradictions, and trying to overcome them lead to weirder and weirder outcomes over time. I talk about black swan events all the time, but people think I mean that they're contingent, that they're totally unpredictable. But no, the unpredictable emerges from the predictable. When the predictable thing builds up these positive feedback loops and spirals out of control, it was predictable that it would do that. But now that you are up in the air, you have a probability of coming down that is almost certain, although not entirely. But where are you going to land? And what is your individual morality going to do about it? I talk about all these conceptions, and I have fairly rigorous conceptions of things. Caesarism, Bonapartism is a subset of that. Cadilloism is a subset of that. Our strong administrative state, or fascism, or whatever. But these are nominal concepts. I get told words mean things. They mean things if we agree they mean things. They do not mean things in the abstract world. Unless you think there is a God giving you pure forms and pure concepts, you have to accept that words are defined by the family resemblances in which they articulate signs and signifiers in ever vaguer ways. We know how to decode them, probably almost innately, and definitely structurally. But they're always shifting in meaning. The context defines the virtue as much as the virtue defines the context. Virtues mean strength, not this good old virility, although it's literally related to it in the etymology of the word, but we won't make an etymology fallacy here. It is what you can model, embody, and be, but you can only embody certain things in certain contexts. You cannot swim if you are not in water. What do you make of that? And how you deal with it is the best you can do in a wrong life. And Adorno implies, in some ways, all lives are wrong. Now, the question that I had, and why I went to systems theory and all these things to get out of this despair that this kind of thought led me into, but to acknowledge there's a fundamental truth here. Let's go back and think again. Men create their world, but it is not of their own making. Or men make history, but it's not of their own doing. Both paraphrases of Marx. meaning that we make our own context. We are feedback loops in that context, but we can't control all of it. You can never do it alone. But you, as an individual, paradoxically, have no meaning except in contrast to other things. As I've said over and over again, and come up with this entire framework with collectives, agental collectives, non-agental collectives, imaginary collectives, aggregates, which are not collectives because they're just statistical facts, individuals, things both in themselves and for themselves. In themselves, the aggregate and the imaginary; for itself, the collective or the individual who knows what his or her or their needs are, their interests, and where to find them, instead of blindly reacting to the stochastic will of interest being imposed upon you. But you can never escape all the paradoxes and contradictions and strange detractors. And I'm using a lot of different models here that pull you in different directions. I've asked to talk more about ethics, and I will. And I'm asked to talk more about organizing, and I will. But remember, you can't just will something to being just because you believe it. This is my big argument with some of the implications of David Graeber. Now, I am often unfair to Graeber. I've been accused of being unfair to him and Harvey. Fine. But still, your limitations are organic and external and mental, which is still organic. It's just internal to the organism. We don't entirely know how it emerges. These things are who we are. And I'm tired of this topic. But often many of you limit your own context, and so you limit what you can do, both morally and politically. But many of you do it to yourself. But there are some things you can't escape. There's no ethical consumption under capitalism, blah, blah, blah. There's also no way to escape consumption. And there is relative ethical consumption. But there's always an outlier, always an unforeseen consequence, always a strange detractor, always the chance of all the things predictably turning into something unpredictable. And there is no way to perfectly navigate that as an individual. And there's no way that your virtues are not limited by your context. What you do with that personally or politically is up to you. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to stay in Hotel Abyss and agree with this. There are ways out. But it involves changing your context. And that's a lot more than hope, our popularity, our leverage, our discipline alone. And it's a lot more than anything you by yourself can do. And if you think that you can just think that all up and throw yourself against the wall like that, you will beat yourself bloody into a pulp. So find hope in giving up the things that are impossible, so you can change the things to make what seems impossible now possible in the future. And that requires a lot more than just belief or morality or politics or ideology. Good luck and protect your peace.